Warning lights bathed the cockpit in a rhythmic crimson strobe. The dreadnought Xyla shuddered violently, a metallic groan reverberating through the hull as another volley from the Void Syndicate hammered against the failing shields. Inside the chaotic bridge, Empress Phylora was locked into the harness of the god-killer exoskeleton, her body rigid, her mind screaming as the neural interface flooded her synapses with raw, unbuffered data. She was drowning in the sheer velocity of the attack, her movements lagging milliseconds behind the enemy fighters. Suddenly, a rough warmth anchored her. Elias was there, not cowering in the safety of the escape pods, but standing on the exposed maintenance rig beside her towering suit. He gripped the external hydraulics, his knuckles white, shouting over the roar of exploding conduits. "Don't fight the tactical algorithm, Phylora. It's too rigid," Elias yelled, his eyes locking with hers through the transparent plastil visor. The intensity of his gaze cut through the panic, a tether holding her to reality. "Switch to manual. Trust the retro-engineering. It is forbidden," she screamed back, feeling the heat of the approaching missiles on the sensors. "The machine's spirit will reject the bypass. Trust me." Elias didn't flinch as a console exploded behind him, showering him in sparks. He reached into the exposed panel of her suit, his fingers finding the crude copper splice he had installed only hours ago. Copper wire beats quantum crystals. Now, he twisted the connection. The suit roared to life, not with a hum but with a feral growl. 48 hours earlier, the Royal Armory was a place of pristine, silent reverence. Elias Thorne, whose current title was nothing more than hatch scrubber, crouched inside the ventilation shaft, peering down through the grate. Below him, Empress Phylora stood before the towering, dormant exoskeleton. It was a masterpiece of lost technology, polished to a mirror sheen, yet utterly lifeless. Chief Chittick, the insectoid head of engineering, chittered nervously as he waved a sensor wand over the machine's knee joint, treating the diagnostic like a religious ritual. "The progenitors remain silent, Your Radiance," Chittick clicked, his antennae drooping. "We have chanted the codes of xenolinguistics. We have offered power from the purest cores. The ancestral memory refuses to wake." Phylora rested her forehead against the cold metal of the machine's leg. "If the Guardian does not wake, our galactic heritage ends when the Syndicate fleet arrives." Elias felt the frustration grinding in his chest. It was agonizing to watch them worship a machine that just had a blown fuse. He couldn't stay quiet, not with his own survival tied to their incompetent mysticism. He kicked the grate loose and dropped 10 feet to the polished floor, landing in a practiced crouch. Guards instantly leveled plasma pikes at his chest. Chittick hissed, mandibles flaring. "The cargo slave, eliminated. Stop treating it like a god," Elias said, his voice rough but steady. He ignored the weapons and walked toward the Empress. "And start treating it like a machine." Phylora turned, her eyes narrowing. She raised a hand, halting the guards. "Speak, Terran, before I let them vaporize you. The gods didn't build it, we did." Elias pointed a grease-stained finger at the sacred runes etched into the armor plating. "That's not a prayer, it's a manufacturing stamp. The Limited Edition, Earth Sector 3. Blasphemy," Chittick spat. "It's Terran ingenuity," Elias countered, stepping into Vylora's personal space. The height difference was intimidating. She was tall, powerful, and alien, but he held his ground. "You're trying to interface with it using complex quantum requests, but this thing wasn't built for nuance. It was built for war. It operates on simple, brutal logic." He looked Phylora in the eye, seeing the desperation masked behind her regal facade. "Your engineers are overthinking it. You need a mechanic, not a priest. Give me a wrench, and I'll give you your guardian." The cockpit lurched as the dreadnought Xylus took a direct hit to the starboard flank. But inside the bridge, the air shifted. The crude copper splice Elias had twisted into place didn't just bridge a circuit. It woke a sleeping giant. The god-killer suit locked around Phylora, the hydraulics hissing with lethal precision. For the first time, the neural interface didn't fight her. It didn't demand complex equations or ritualistic calm. It demanded action. The machine's ancestral memory flooded her mind, not with prayers, but with combat data. It was raw, aggressive, and distinctly human. It's listening. Vylora breathed, her eyes wide. She looked at Elias, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was inches away, sweat slicking his brow, his hand still bracing the manual override panel. In the chaos of the red alert strobes, he looked less like a captive and more like a partner. "Don't ask it for permission," Elias shouted, the deck vibrating beneath his boots. "Tell it to kill. That's what it was built for." Vylora turned back to the view screen. The Void Syndicate fleet was a swarm of silver needles, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They expected the rigid, predictable defense patterns of the Royal Guard. They did not expect Terran rage. Vylora didn't think. She moved. He applied her intent instantly. She bypassed the standard targeting computers, relying on the suit's tactile feedback. She sidestepped a plasma lance with a burst of thrusters that rattled the bridge's teeth, then returned fire with a barrage of kinetic rounds that shredded the lead Syndicate cruiser. "Impossible." Chittick shrieked from his station, watching the telemetry readings spike off the charts. "The tactical algorithm cannot support this aggression." "It's not an algorithm," Elias yelled, watching Vylora dance through the enemy fire with terrifying grace. "It's instinct." The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. Vylora tore through the Syndicate formation, the suit moving faster than their targeting computers could track. She was a blur of vengeance, guided by the man standing beside her. When the last enemy ship shattered into drifting debris, the silence that followed was electric. Vylora disengaged the helmet, the hiss of decompression sharp in the quiet bridge. She turned to Elias, her chest heaving, her skin flushed with the residual heat of the link. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, blurring the line between combat high and attraction. She stepped out of the rig, the distance between them vanishing as she grabbed his shoulders, checking him for injuries. "You knew," she whispered, her gaze intense. "You knew the spirit of the machine." "I told you," Elias said, his voice dropping, the tension in the room shifting from survival to something far more magnetic. Ancestral ghosts speaking dead languages. "You just needed a translator." He reached past her to the suit's chest plate, tapping a sequence of faded symbols that Chittick had spent decades trying to decipher. "See this? It's not an incantation for divine wrath," Elias explained, tracing the letters. "It says, USMC prototype, front toward enemy. Xenolinguistics is easy when you're reading your great-grandfather's mail." The realization washed over Vylora. The godlike progenitors, the architects of their galactic heritage, were not ethereal beings of light. They were humans, stubborn, reckless, brilliant humans like the man standing before her. Later, as the Xylos began repairs, the dynamic of the crew had irrevocably shifted. The shackles were gone. Elias stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars, now clad in the uniform of a fleet architect. Vylora joined him, standing close enough that their arms brushed. The hierarchy of Empress and slave had dissolved in the fire of the ambush. "Chittick is still hyperventilating over the manual," Vylora said, a rare smile touching her lips. "He says the logic is too simple to be advanced." "Simple works," Elias replied, looking at her. "Complexity fails. Simplicity survives." "And what of us, architect?" she asked, the title sounding like a promise. "Now that we know the truth of the ruins?" "Now," Elias grinned, looking out at the infinite black. "Now we go find the rest of the fleet." From cargo slave to fleet architect is a hell of a promotion, but I think explorer sounds better. Vylora took his hand, the partnership sealed not by decree, but by the undeniable proof of their survival. "Agreed," she said. "Show me what else your ancestors built."